Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Edelman's Executive Vice President of Social Impact and Sustainability, Ann Clark.
Water. We can't live without it. We can't grow food without it. Industries can't run without it. But our supplies of water are in jeopardy, in part because of extreme swings in weather caused by climate change. Parts of the world, including the American West, China, and Europe, have been enduring mega droughts. Crops are withering, and water sources are running dry. In other places, such as Pakistan, widespread flooding has cost thousands of lives, displaced millions of people, and destroyed vital food supplies. Water is all around, but none of it is potable. The solutions are not easy. They will require difficult choices, and they may cause hardship. We know they will be expensive and will take time. Meanwhile, the shortage of water will lead to competition, perhaps even conflict. So we asked the IWF membership to answer this question: should all government limit water consumption by citizens and industries? This is IWF Pulse results. 59% said yes, it's time, while 15% said no, not yet. This is the fun part. Let's hear what our panelists think. Our first guest has held leadership roles across American Water, the largest publicly traded water and wastewater utility company in the United States. She has served as Chief Environmental Officer, and today is the company's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Cheryl Norton. Also with us, the two-term president, or Sikyong, of the Central Tibetan Administration, known as the Tibetan Government in Exile. He is a senior visiting fellow with Harvard Law School's East Asian Legal Studies program. Welcome, Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sangay. And our third guest has been a leader in the international water community for more than 30 years. She served as the CEO of the Las Vegas Valley Water District and is the owner and founder of Sustainable Strategies, and a member of IWF Nevada. Welcome, Pat Mulroy. And before we begin, I want to remind our audience that you can submit questions to our panelists throughout this session. Simply open your IWF conference app, click on Agenda, and select our session, Clean Water. Then tap on Questions to submit your question. If you are an IWF member, make sure to also share which forum you're from. Now, let's get started. So Pat, I would love to start with you, since this is your home turf, and I mispronounced Nevada, which you told me beforehand not to do. I was seeing if you were paying attention.
It's important.
You have negotiated on behalf of Nevada, one of the states that draws water from the Colorado River, which is at historic lows. How dire is the situation in this region?
Well, I've described it as standing on the ledge with your toes dangling over the end, right? We've been in the throes of this 22-year drought now And the problem with it is that it's moving so much faster than any climate scientist predicted. It's not that we didn't expect what we're facing right now, it's that the pace at which it's accelerating is so much faster. We are looking right now, if we have a winter like last winter, and there is no change on the river in terms of being able to leave water behind in the reservoirs, by 2025, Glen Canyon Dam will stop generating electricity, and the Grand Canyon won't have any water, and that means Lake Mead's going to start crashing, and we're going to hit a point where we get to what we call dead pool, which is the very bottom of the reservoir, at which point nothing can go downstream, which means California, Arizona, and Mexico get nothing. So we are really at a crossroads, and the next 12 months are going to be incredibly critical that the states step up and are willing to make some substantial reductions in what they take from the river in order to protect the reservoirs and the system as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And in follow-up, we know that states need to step up, but the federal government has also imposed restrictions.
Now, the federal government's kind of a toothless tiger in this whole thing. I have to be very honest. The river is governed by a compact signed by the 7 states and the 1944 treaty with Mexico. In truth of fact, what the Secretary of Interior can do is pretty limited, because under Nevada law, under US law, a compact between states governs. And water is a reserved right to the states under the Constitution. So that compact and the subsequent Boulder Canyon Project Act, Glen Canyon Project Act, various court cases, various agreements dictate what the Secretary can do. So she is really dependent on getting the cooperation of the states at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So in response to this, Cheryl, in Jackson, if we widen the aperture a little bit to look nationally, in Mississippi elsewhere, flooding has damaged and destroyed water infrastructure. And for water utilities, which is worse, flooding or drought? And how do you prepare for it?
Yeah, thanks. It's hard for me to say that flooding or drought is a worse condition. We see both serious flooding and damage. Water can do an incredible amount of damage when it comes in the volumes that it does when there are floods. But also drought, if you don't have water, there's not a lot you can do to manage that. And so we've seen both sides of it. And in many of our locations, what happened in Jackson was just a travesty from my perspective. It should have never happened. You have to be sure that you're making the investments before you have the crisis. You have to make sure that you have the right expertise at the table running your systems so that you're prepared for those kinds of things. You have to look ahead. And these 500-year floods now are happening, every 10 years or so. It's a huge problem that continues to get worse, and I would agree with Pat. I think it's gotten worse a lot faster than we expected it to, but we really are looking at systems where so when Hurricane Ida came through the New Jersey area, we had our largest treatment facility in New Jersey that had serious flooding. We had built a wall around our plant previously, and then we upped that wall by about 4 feet, literally within a year or two before that flood came through. And the floodwaters got up to halfway on the new part of the wall, indicating that we had done just enough in just enough time. 9 months later, we were dealing with water restrictions in that same system. So it's not just the flood or the drought situation. In a lot of cases, we're dealing with both. It's something we really have to talk about and be prepared for because it's coming.
Mm-hmm. In a vicious cycle, it sounds like. Yes. So if we think about this on the global stage, then, Lobsang, please explain the vital role that the Tibetan Plateau plays in supplying Asia with water, and tell us what impact climate change is having there.
Going from Nevada to the US as far as water crisis is concerned, globally, in 3 years' time, 2025, half the countries in the world will have shortage of fresh water. Mm-hmm. Now, in 2015, World Economic Forum did a crisis report, and they listed water as #1 crisis. So it's global. Right? Now, Tibet plays a vital role, and I'll try to show a slide here, because many of you know, we all talk about, Antarctic and Arctic as the first and second pole. But how many of you know Tibet is regarded as the third pole because you have the third highest reserve or largest reserve of ice on the Tibetan plateau? When the glaciers of Tibetan mountains melt, it forms rivers. And hence, Tibet is the source of major rivers of Asia. And if you look at it, Yangtze River, Yellow River, they are the lifeline for China. Yellow River is the cradle of Chinese civilization. It starts from Tibet. If you look at Mekong, Salween, Irrawaddy, lifeline for Burma, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, whole of ASEAN countries. Brahmaputra, lifeline for Bangladesh, for northeast of India. And then if you look at Indus River and Satluj River, lifeline for India and Pakistan, all flow from Tibet. So Tibet is vital. Now, Tibet also acts as the water cooler of sort. Jet stream over Tibet affects summer of Europe and winter of North America as well. So it's all interrelated. Now, showing you the next slides. Now, look at these two pictures of 1921. Look at the snow that is there. And this is another picture of the same mountains in 2009. You see all the snow and the glaciers are melted. Now it's just water there. And then the glaciers of Tibet is melting so fast because of urbanization, the Chinese migrants are moving in, because of industrialization, minerals are extracted, right? And the global warming or climate change. So hence, this is the source of water for whole of Asia. But it's melting so fast that it's disappearing. The previous slide that I showed you about Mount Everest, imagine Mount Everest without snow. Why I say this is, if you look at the Himalayas, some of the lower level mountains are without snow. So this is a real problem. Now, look at this map of picture of Yangtze River. This summer, it's drying up. It's a lifeline for China. So even the Chinese environmentalists are saying we should declare Tibet as a natural reserve, so that we can preserve Tibetan plateau for the sake of China and Asia. So hence, Tibet is vital as far as water is concerned.
Absolutely. And I know we've touched a little bit on some of the challenges in giving you all a lay on the land, but I want to spend some time now on cooperation and competition. So heading to you, Cheryl, in your work, you sometimes approach water use on a regional basis. Are US states cooperating or competing?
Yeah, I think we see some of both. The water industry is incredibly fragmented. There are over 50,000 water utilities across the US. When you compare that to the gas and electric utilities, there's only about 1,400 gas utilities across the US and about 3,800 electric utilities across the US. Fragmentation, inefficiencies as a result of fragmentation, a lack of expertise. It's really hard in a lot of locations to find certified operators. There needs to be consolidation for sure. And we find some areas where that works really well. We are a private utility, and for some communities, that's a good solution. For other communities, it may be working with rural water associations or municipal systems where they can bring all these systems together. But in many cases, people are very focused on the fact that water is a very local business, and they absolutely are opposed to looking at the solutions that make sense for them. It makes investment in infrastructure really challenging, and it makes the cost to those individual customers for small systems in particular very challenging. The other piece is the expertise part of it that I referred to earlier, and not just with certified operators, but as the regulations get more and more stringent, and as we find more and more capabilities around testing and understanding what chemicals are actually in the water water driving contamination for us. Those costs also have to be layered on. That expertise has to be thought of as well. And so we need absolutely more cooperation from the state leadership across the US. For those of you who are not from the US, it's like we have 50 different countries. So every state does things a little bit differently, but we need everybody to sit down to the table, help water and wastewater services to be affordable for customers all across the US. And for some customers, it's a huge challenge. We've got to address that piece as well. So when you think about expertise, affordability, infrastructure investment, it's all a big package, and everybody's going to have to work together to fix this. We're very far from that right now.
And Pat, I'm interested to hear what your experience has been when it comes to cooperation and competition, any best practices maybe.
Well, we had the realization fairly early here in Southern Nevada that competition was only going to drive us off the cliff. We were going to run out of water. We were not going to be able to survive. So in the early 90s, we created the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which I also led for 30 years. And with the creation of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, all the various jurisdictions came together, gave up a lot of their authorities and brought them together. We gave up our priority water rights. We said they make no sense between cities. We agreed to a joint conservation program, and it's allowed us to build over $3 billion in facilities with not a dime of state money, not a dime of federal money, simply from the ratepayers here in Southern Nevada. It has been an incredible experience for us, and so that experience also translates into the Colorado River. The things the 7 basin states and the US states and the country of Mexico have been able to achieve in that basin has been extraordinary. We signed a shortage agreement in 2007 whereby we all agreed that when Lake Mead had certain elevations, we would reduce the amount of water we used. Then in 2012, we entered into an agreement with Mexico, and this is a first. We said to Mexico, you can store water in our reservoirs if you fallow early, if you take some of your ag out, rotationally fallow, and you can leave it in our reservoirs at our expense, and you can then call on it when you need it. Lake Mead today is 60 feet higher than it would be had the states and the country of Mexico not cut back how much water they were taking from the river. I mean, it has been an extraordinary level of conservation and an extraordinary level of cooperation between the states and 2 countries.
Incredible. So let's talk about this on the international arena for a second, and competitions you've seen lobsang among countries. We know that China already diverts water from the Yangtze and has plans underway to divert and store even more. How serious will the impacts be downstream? And do you think this could lead to conflict in the region?
Whether there will be a war over water or not, I think former UN Secretary General, as early as Boutros Ghali, Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, all have said there is potential for war over water. Now, for example, diversion of Yangtze River in China is one case. China has 19% of the world population, but only 12% of fresh water, which means 400 to 5 million Chinese are already facing scarcity of fresh water. Situation in India is worse. Situation in Pakistan is worse, as we saw during summer. So with the limited water and major demand, the Chinese government in 2019, they diverted river and then it affected Thailand enormously. So all the neighboring countries are very worried that China might divert rivers towards arid land in the northwest of China. So it's very likely. Now, China is yet to sign the UN Convention on Water Sharing, so they don't have to share. Now, what happens to hundreds of millions of people downstream if the Chinese government diverts rivers upward and don't release it to downstream people? Hundreds of millions of people in Asia will be impacted. As it is, 20% of the world population in that area they rely on rivers from Tibet, and China controls those rivers. So it's a real issue. India is worried, all the neighboring countries are worried. Hence, there is a potential that conflict is very likely.
And do you think it would benefit the international community to have some sort of body that adjudicates water rights on a global level? Is that a potential solution?
Yes, as I said, in 3 years, 2025, half the countries in the world will face water scarcity, right? Now, all has to come together, and how to conserve, how to manage, how to use water should be a serious issue. Even the underground water, North Africa, North America, Middle East, and South Asia, is depleting very fast. So water crisis is real, right? And then there's another data. By 2030, energy, water, and food will peak, and the population will increase from 2030 on, and climate change will impact. So the food, energy, and water will decrease, population will increase, and then you can clearly see by 2050, there will be so much shortage of water, food, and energy all over the world, and we will be fighting over scarce resources, and crises and conflicts are real. So that's why water is called white gold.
We've talked a lot about quantity of water. There's a fixed amount on this planet, as many of you may know, but I would like to spend a second, Cheryl, on the quality. We've all read the headlines about antibiotics in water, chemicals in water, and I'm hoping you could share a little bit about how this is screened for and how to eliminate them. What can be done about this increasing challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I started my career doing water quality research within American Water, and so I go way back in kind of where we were at the time, and that was back in the 1980s. I started when I was 12, so yeah, it was a really long time ago, but back then, the big issue was the new lead and copper rule. We were testing for lead and copper, and that was the first big kind of swath of the lead and copper issue. It's funny because today we're still looking at new revisions to the lead and copper rule. So those kinds of contaminants are still an issue for us. We're still looking at them, but it's the new things that are coming about. It's the chemicals that are breaking down, the chemicals that we've been using for manufacturing processes that are finding their ways into the waterways that never break down. And that's the real concern, is that we've got chemicals that we can now test for, we can see at very low levels that we know have health implications, and it's how do we regulate those at the right speed, at the right level, and make it still affordable for customers to be able to pay their bills. And then it gets even more complicated because as a water utility, as we remove those chemicals from the source water, then we've got media of some sort, filter media or resin, that we have to deal with because it has absorbed that chemical onto it. And so it's a whole cycle of challenges that we're facing. And I think that as an industry as a whole, we've got to, in part, hold manufacturers responsible if they've been irresponsible in doing it. In many cases, I think manufacturers really had no idea what was happening or what they were doing. But we've got to continue to move forward with technology and figure out the best way to treat for each of those individual chemicals. Unfortunately, one treatment's not effective for all of them, and so you've got multiple layers of treatment that you have to put in place. But we have to keep our eye on the ball. We have to hold water utilities accountable for producing clean, safe water, but we've also got to have the technology and the ability to do that, again, at an affordable cost, which is a huge challenge. There's so many facets of that.
And can I add one? For example, we all have smartphones. In your iPhone, you need 1 spoonful of lithium to run your iPhone. But you have to use 500,000 gallons of water, and that will have 190,000 iPhones. For 190,000 iPhones, you have to use 500,000 gallons of water.
Yeah, it's about 1,300 gallons per iPhone.
And then that water, fresh water, is, because while extracting lithium, you have to use chemical. So 500,000 gallons of fresh water is now polluted. It goes to underground and pollute the soil and pollute underground water. If it goes to river, it pollutes the river. So the pollution of environment is also real. So that is not an easy solution.
Speaking of solutions that are not easy, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that there is a water main break in the US every 2 minutes, and that 6 billion gallons of water is lost every day, and this is treated water. And they give America's water infrastructure grade C-. So Pat, the recently enacted infrastructure bill allocates $50 billion for investment in drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, single largest investment in water ever made by the US government. Is it anywhere close to what's needed, though?
I think we need to put this in perspective. First of all, yes, there is a tremendous amount of water being lost, particularly in older cities. Here in Southern Nevada, we realized early on we can't go to our customers and say, we want you to conserve, and at the same time have a system that's a leaking sieve. So we've gotten our leakage where on the East Coast you can find communities with 40, even 50% leakage in their urban systems. We have less than 2% in our system.
Incredible.
We have really cranked it down. And how much of that is a meter irregularity and how much of that is an actual leakage, I'm not sure we really have a grip on that. But the amount of money that's in that act, yes, in the aggregate, it sounds like a lot. But when you divide that by 50 states, and then you subdivide it by all the various water utilities in every one of the states, it becomes a drop in the bucket. It is going to have to be we've ignored water for so long. I mean, we build these systems and then we bury them. Nobody thinks about them, nobody pays attention to them, and in a lot of cities it's embedded in the city bureaucracy to where they're a department of a city and they have to spend their money in 1 year, and if they don't, it all goes back to the general fund. How do you plan maintenance on a utility with that kind of a, infrastructure around you, political infrastructure around you? There has to be a change in how water utilities are structured. Here in the West, we've got a lot more utilities that are autonomous. You can't take money away from us. We don't roll money back to the cities. You can't touch those resources. And so it affords us the opportunity to be able to invest. People in the country are going to have to come to grips with the fact that just like their power bills went up 30 years ago, their water bills are going to go up. It's inevitable. Now, yes, we can go with our tin cups to the federal government and say, put money in this tin cup, but there's not going to be enough money to put in that tin cup. So it's going to require a recognition by communities how important their water resources and their water infrastructure is to that community and to the well-being of their citizenry, and have a willingness to create a political infrastructure around it that allows that money to be targeted and used and managed wisely, and then invest in the systems. And that's where Cheryl has an advantage. As an investor-owned company, they don't have to worry about that, right? They can manage their resources and do their preventive maintenance as needed. It's just as simple as all that, and it's time to just stop sugarcoating it and saying, this is what it is.
And to that end, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, cities, countries around the world, who is doing this well? What is a bright spot that we can look toward for the future of water management control? Who has really had this together with a good plan?
Well, there are a couple of places. There was a very progressive thing done in Louisville. They completely changed their structure. They were a city-embedded department, and they pulled their water and wastewater resources out of that structure and created an autonomous agency. You see it in Scotland, you see it in Louisville. It's starting to change on the East Coast. The West has had to come to grips with that much sooner because of the scarcity of the resource and the need to build the necessary infrastructure. But it's starting to happen all over the country, and quite honestly, look at Mekarot in Israel, right? You have one centralized national water agency that builds all the infrastructure for the entire country. They don't have little breakout utilities. So it can be done, it needs to be done, but the thing is, it's going to take some political courage, and that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I agree, Pat. We've got to take the politics out of it. Got to take the politics out of it. Water and wastewater should not be political kind of chips, if you will, and communities have to have the courage to do that.
Are there any that come to mind to you as a bright spot?
Yeah, Louisville would have been one. It's one of the best kind of municipal, quasi-municipal systems. They have significant. They do research, they do planning, they make sure, Cincinnati Waterworks is doing a really good job as well. There are several municipal systems that are doing a great job, but you have so many of them, way more than you can even imagine, that are more like Jackson, Mississippi, that are not making the investments, that they're just not being responsible, and they're not caring for their customers at all. And so we've got to take the politics out of that. You can't not invest because you don't want to raise rates because you've got an election coming up and you might not get reelected. It just
Well, to
does
make
not
matters worse, they didn't want to raise taxes, so they used water and wastewater
Exactly.
rates as backdoor taxes.
Yes.
So if I go to many customers and I say, these are your utility rates, they're not taxes, they don't believe you.
Right.
They have figured out that they are being taxed for police and fire and parks and recreation and all other municipal services because no one wanted to raise taxes. And it became the convenient way to do it, putting up a smoke screen of this is what we're doing in water and wastewater when it wasn't really true.
Right.
And so the industry itself has lost a lot of credibility.
If we stick on this theme of solutions, bright spots, I'm curious to understand, Cheryl, is water recycling and reuse a solution? And many in this audience are probably wondering, what about the ick factor of recycling and reuse?
Yeah, it's absolutely a solution that we have to fully utilize, particularly in areas where we have such severe drought. So we're doing it very successfully and using water on the West Coast. It's much more accepted there. There are so many ways. A lot of times water that comes out of a wastewater treatment facility will be much higher quality than water that you would pull from a river. And so the treatment is incredible. There are ways to re-inject it back into the aquifer so that the earth naturally takes care of even additional cleaning of that water so that by the time you pull it out to treat it again for drinking water, again, it's cleaner than what you would pull out of a river, a stream, a lake, or anything like that. So it's absolutely going to have to be part of the equation. We're looking at a solution in our Monterey district in California where we think that recycled water is going to be about 40% of the water that we use in that community if we get all the approvals that we need. So it's going to be key for us.
Well, here in Southern Nevada, we recycle 93% of all wastewater that hits the sewer.
Which is awesome. And
If
yet,
it hits the sewer system, it gets reused.
yes. And yet, in some locations, we're hard pressed to convince people to use it to water the golf courses. So there's a lot of education. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. Particularly in the areas where they feel like they're water rich, but in the Midwest where they feel like they've got tons of water, the Mississippi River right now is at dangerously low levels. And so again, it's a problem that is coming and going, and in 6 months we could be flooded out there.
Right.
But so we've got to figure out what's that right baseline level of use.
And clearly there are strategies that are working. I'm curious to understand to what extent when you find something that's working, you have a pilot, it works, is it replicated in places around the world to break this idea that water is local, which we all know is a misconception?
Yeah, I think we don't always learn as much from a global perspective as what we could. I think we've gotten a lot better at that. There are countries where desal is really embraced and utilized, and it's hugely effective. And we're a lot slower here to be able to get the approvals that we need to use it in a way that makes the most sense for those communities. It is an expensive proposition, but there are ways to reduce the cost. There are ways to blend it with other types of treatment to make sure that you're doing it at the right level. And so I think that that is a technology that we've learned about, but we just haven't actually embraced as much in the US as we could have. But when you talk about globally, a lot of the issues globally are in some of the third world countries where they have no access to clean water or sanitation at all. And it's a real problem. But we're starting to see a lot of these NGOs that have adopted a much better approach. Instead of going into a community and putting a well in and saying, here you go, you've got water now. They go in, they make the community partners pay to be part of the project. And so they have ongoing costs, that community does. As poor as they are, they come up with the money, and then they teach them how to maintain those wells and how to take care of those facilities. It's been a huge change in the way things have happened in some of the really more challenged areas of the world. And I'm really excited. We support Water for People. There are several organizations that are doing this, but it's a really tremendous kind of effort that's making a difference. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's one data that 75% of the population in the world by 2050 will have a shortage of water in their homes. So it's real issue. Talking about desalinization, obviously Israel has been, it's in the midst of desert, but they have successfully desalinated water and sell it to all the neighboring countries. And the dripping system that they have has been very successful. But desalinization technology is very expensive. One way to desalinate is to separate water from the salt of ocean. Now, you have to heat the water, right? Then you separate water and the salt. Now, where do you take the salt? Again, you have to throw it somewhere. Again, it pollutes the soil. Mm-hmm. And then it's very energy-intensive technology at the moment. So you have to use lots of energy, lots of money to produce fresh water, and then you pollute the soil. Mm-hmm. Hence, the technology has to advance, and then the temperature water. Some areas you can do it more easily because water is warm. If the water is cold, then it takes much more energy. So again, it's very complicated, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to being the bearer of bad news, but by being the only man in the panel, maybe whole day, that was assigned to me, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you're the bearer of bad news, but let's be honest. I mean, if that many countries and that part of our population globally is going to have a shortage of water, we're going to have to look at ocean desal, and we're going to have to look at reuse. There's no choice.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned, by 2030, in 2030s, we are talking about 10 years' time. Huh? So we used to talk about environmental crisis for what will happen to our grandchildren. No, in our lifetime, in the next 10 years.
Yours, maybe, not mine.
You will be very much alive and healthy in 10 years, So energy, water, and food will peak in production, okay? Now, population will keep increasing. Now, where do you bring energy, water, and food for this increasing number of population? Now, in Asia, it will be worse. 2/3 of the world population increase will be in Asia. By 2050, some say 5.6 billion people will be in Asia. And as it is facing water scarcity. Now, what happens if it is 5.6 billion in that area? Where do they get energy, water, and food, right? It's a major crisis. And we all have to take it very, very seriously. So global leaders have to come together, national leaders have to come together, local leaders have to come together, really brainstorm it as a universal, national, local issue, and obviously keep politics and populism aside, and start addressing this. Otherwise, it will be a major challenge. And there will be, as not me saying, this is UN Secretary Generals, not just one, 3 have said, there will be war over water.
Yes.
Well, I think at the end of the day, let's be real here. There are more people on this planet than this planet can support, right? Global population has exploded. Human population has exploded. There is no more water on this planet than there was 1 million years ago. I mean, everything we drink today is dinosaur pee at the end of the day, right?
Everyone write that down.
So it's the same amount of water,
Yeah.
but the amount of people that are depending on it has just exploded. So it's a rebalancing. And that means coming to grips with how much we each use individually.
Yes, thank you all. And this is a very rich discussion. I know we have a lot of audience questions, so let's get to the first one. Karina Funk, IWF Massachusetts. You discussed collaboration among states and communities. What is the role of corporations to collaborate in a given watershed to share the resource? Are there good examples of this happening, bad examples? I don't know if Cheryl, you want to take this one?
Sure. I think it's absolutely important that corporations play a role in this. Corporations use a lot of water. Corporations also can be huge polluters of water. In areas where we have a lot of industrial customers, we work closely with those industrial customers to make sure that they understand the importance of what they do to the watershed. They also, we have a collaborative group in the Virginia area where I think they've just done a really great job of having the conversations, being transparent about what's happening, so that if there is an issue, they know who to call, they know what to do, and they understand how their work impacts the watershed and the area that they're in. And the more we can collaborate as a water utility with the community that we serve, particularly the corporations, the better off we're all going to be. And so, we've had some areas where we've had industries that have leaked pollutants into the water, and they don't raise their hand. They don't talk to us about that, and we're trying to push really hard to move away from that. In those highly industrialized areas, it can be very scary, the things that they're working with, the things that they could potentially put into the watershed. And so we try to keep a really close eye on it and have a whole network. We have an Orsenco network, which is the Ohio River, and there's communication all along that river, and we know what industry's there, and we know what they produce to try to be able to detect quickly if there's a watershed event, but really to try to prevent it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And here in Southern Nevada, if the corporations hadn't stepped up and taken a leadership role, we would never have achieved our conservation goal. And you're sitting in the property of probably the community's biggest leader in that area.
Yeah.
I mean, 20, 30 years ago, the Wynn Resorts was right at the forefront of making sure that they were as water efficient as they possibly could be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to comment on the corporations of Nevada. I'm sure they're doing a good job.
They are.
I also want to, be a tourist for a few days, so I want my return ticket back to Boston. But I want to talk about corporations in Europe, right? In Switzerland is known for Great Lakes and mountains. But if you go to a restaurant, they don't give you tap water. You have to buy bottled water. You go to Italy. So it's amazing in Europe that if you ask for tap water, restaurants say, we will not provide you. You have to buy bottled water. So, commercialization of water. Mm-hmm. In Europe, in the cleanest countries, the cleanest water, that's how they marketize. So not commenting on Nevada's corporation, but European corporation, okay?
Listen, I'm born and raised in Germany. So
Okay.
preaching to the choir, right? But let's not commercialize water. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
People have a different reaction toward their water supply than they do toward electricity,
Absolutely.
the minerals under their land. They have a visceral reaction. It's almost as if intuitively they know their survival depends on it without even verbalizing it. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very different dynamic.
Completely agree.
To that end, this is a room full of action-oriented, powerful women how can they help address this water issue? And I'd like each of you to answer. And Cheryl, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would guess that there are probably several people out there in the audience who have no idea what their water source is or how that water gets from the source to your tap. And they also don't know, probably, when they flush the toilet, where's that go and what happens to it after that? I would encourage all of you to start thinking about that as one of the most important resources and one of the absolutely most important utilities that you have, and learn more about your personal situation and how your community is investing in that to ensure that you are protected and that that system is sustainable.
Lobsang, your thoughts?
If you are in leadership position, conservation of water, management of water is very important. But as we say, think globally but act locally. At individual level, do you keep the tap water on while you brush your teeth? Do you, when you shampoo your hair, how long do you wash? Does it have to be 20 minutes to wash your hair? Can you do it in 3 minutes?
Depends how long your hair is.
Exactly.
But some people, really want silky hair, so they think washing it more make it silky.
Talking to a room full of women.
I'm sorry. I know the exit road through the back door, so I know very well. So at individual level, for example, when you keep your charger on, right, you are using electricity. Similarly, when you brush your teeth, when you wash your face, when you wash your hair, when you take shower, all these, matter. So definitely, we all can contribute individually.
I'm going to come at this, I'm next, right? I'm going to come at this a little differently because it's my current pet peeve. A lot of us in this room sit on corporate boards or we deal with corporations, and we're tethered to our ESG scores these days. Well, what is an ESG score driven by? Your power use. There's a collision between power and water. If you reduce your water use, you increase your power use. If you decrease your power use, you increase your water use. The two are not mutually compatible, and there's a new fulcrum. But in the ESG rating, water needs to become a relevant factor. In every conversation we have with those highly intelligent geniuses that sit and make those decisions in Wall Street, no comment there. They need to become aware of it, and they need to give water a very different level of importance than they are today. It's not all about carbon. Carbon is about mitigating the impacts of climate change. Water is about adapting to those consequences we're not going to change because they're already affecting us. Both of those have to come into play.
Absolutely. And with that note, thank you so much, Cheryl, Lobsang, Pat, for this important and extremely thought-provoking conversation about a topic that impacts every single one of us, if it isn't already. And without further ado, we are going to take a break for a conversation and refreshments. It would be great help if you could exit the ballroom also so we can prepare for lunch. I know we're keeping you from that. But please visit the incredible pop-up shops, and don't forget to change your shoes for the afternoon behind the scenes. We look forward to seeing you at 12:25 for lunch, and enjoy the break.